Yo, what is up, you guys? Thanks for joining in for another Fireside Talk Stories. Last time I left you off with Chapter 3, Prepared for the Journey. Codes Andre and John, the rest of the class, and Miss Tiger are getting ready to go to Brazil. We are on the plane, I should say, boarding the plane and getting ready for this trip. Chapter 4 is where it starts getting a little bit more dicey. This is where the good stuff starts to come into effect. So, without further ado, Chapter 4 of The Creatures, Disaster Strikes. As Code and Zandre both boarded the plane, they took their seats by each other, both buckling themselves in. Looking at Code, Zandre said, "You ready for the trip?" "I'm so ready. I heard they have great food." "Oh yeah, food, and it looks like they have a great library of movies," Code answered, scrolling through the small TV screen in the seat in front of him. Meanwhile, John had been scheming up a plan from behind. Wadding up a piece of paper, he eyed his target, Mrs. Tiger. As John threw the wad of paper, it made contact with a fellow student's chair and veered right, hitting Code in the back of the head. Code whipped around with what looked like fire in his eyes. "Sorry, man. Was aiming at Miss Tiger," John said hesitantly. Code gave John a warning look, raising an eyebrow, while John just smiled back. But his smile soon faded away, and John turned white as a ghost. His appalled look was followed by the explosion of the right wing of the plane. Code grabbed Zandre's hand tightly, prepared for the worst. Closed his eyes, grit his teeth, and held on to the armrest, praying for some kind of miracle. The plane began to plummet to the ground, chaos ensuing all around. In what seemed like seconds, Code opened his eyes and looked to his left to see Zandre unconscious. Code unbuckled his seat and reached towards her. Her eyes slowly opened as she began to come to. She shifted her eyes to the surrounding wreckage around her. Looking over Code's shoulder, she saw the lifeless bodies of all her classmates, including Mrs. Tiger. As tears welled up in her eyes, she began one by one unbuckling her friends' seatbelts, and in her stripped power crawled to their now shells. She cried out as she looked up at Code, who had followed from behind. Beating her fists against his chest, she looked up at Code, her face stained with tears, searching for any source of comfort. Code tried to scrounge up any comfort he can give, but still was lost himself. As Code embraced Zandre, a faint moan was heard. Code looked over in relief to see John releasing himself from his seat. "John!" Code yelled as he rushed over to help, with Zandre following from behind. Are you okay?" With a deep sigh, John replied, "God, is that you?" Code sighed in relief and looked over at Zandre. "He's fine," Zandre responded, wiping her tears away with a broken smile. The three took what food and supplies they could carry and left the wreckage. With the absolute jungle surrounding them, Code, Zandre, and John set off to find shelter. "How?" Zandre asked in disarray. Code looked at her. "How what?" "How can... I mean, how could this be?" Zandre replied. Seeing the utter shock in her eyes, Code softly replied, I don't know." Zandre, expecting a comforting word, sat down on the jungle floor, weeping again. Code and John kneeled down next to her. Code softly said, "I don't know. But what I do know is that if we stay here, their stories may never be told," referring to the lost classmates. You believe we can survive this godforsaken place to tell their story? Asked Andre, through sobs. Code lifted her face and looked deep into her eyes, as if to speak directly to her soul. I can't promise, but I sincerely believe our will and strength will shine through. I too am at a loss for words, replied John. But if I know anything about you two, you both are able to lead us out of here alive. Zandre smiled, looking at Code. Thank you, John, she answered as she collected herself, following Code and John. As the three of them began their harrowing journey, they walked treacherously through thick, dense grass and trees with the company of an appalling assortment of insects one could not begin to describe. Nightmares attempted to consume their minds, but their will shook off the feeling. While pushing their way through, a noise halted their progress. What was that? Sandra whispered. It sounded like it came from behind. Code led them to a nearby boulder. As Code peered around, he witnessed a horrifying creature with body parts of various animals mixed with human. It stopped and sniffed the air. Code held his breath while it proceeded on its way. He slowly looked back behind the boulder with eyes arrayed. Sandre asked, What did you see? Code, looking forward, pointed at another creature standing in front of them in a wide stance, staring intensely. It leaned towards Code's face and took a couple of sniffs, reared back its head, letting out a blood-curdling screech. Run? John asked. Run, Code answered. The three bolted up, running away with the creature hot on their heels. Tearing through tall weeds and harsh thistles, the creature seemed to call out to another. There's more? Sandra yelled to Code. Code, in a dead run, looked behind him as two creatures gained ground. But as he turned back around, he was tripped up by a vine that appeared to be set by another human in a simplistic booby trap. Sandra quickly noticed Code and ran back towards him. John looked back and ran to Code and Sandra. At the same time she had reached him, a strange man hollered to them from a cave in the ground to their right. Come in, quickly! With no other choice, the three stumbled into the cave just as one creature attempted to reach for Code's leg, leaving a nasty gash as its claws narrowly missed. Code screamed in pain as Sandra dragged him into the cave. Both creatures let out one more synchronized screech, clawing at the opening. Nasty buggers, a voice in the dark bunker said. The figure of a man seemed to grab a gun behind Code's head, proceeding towards the side of the cave, where there was a small hole just big enough for the barrel to fit through, and shot at the creatures, killing both of them. The blood of the creatures spewed out as they gave out one final breath. Code looked at Sandre concerningly. What were those things? Code asked the man. And why were they after us? Sandre added. The man turned to his left and set the gun down. He looked at Code and said with a sigh, You, Code. And there we go. Chapter 4 of The Creatures. Now we're starting to get into the meat of the story, man, and it is gonna get good. Good. But with all of that said, thank you guys again for joining in for another Fireside Talk Stories. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with a friend so they can sit back and relax and just listen to a story, be read to them. But I love you guys. You guys have an amazing night. I'll see you guys later on. Peace out.